Every community association has one thing in common: physical assets that the association is responsible for. These common assets may be as simple as an entryway into your homeowners association, or as complex as the engineering components in a high-rise condominium. Whether simple or complex, all will face the day when they'll have to be replaced, and the association will have to pay for that work.
Hi, I'm Tony Abruzzo.
And I'm Janet Pound. We're going to take the next half hour or so to discuss with you the subject of capital repair and replacement reserves. The first part of this video is aimed at members of the Board of Directors. Additionally, we've added a short section following the credits that you can use to show directly to the owners, possibly at a general meeting. In that section, we clearly explain the need for reserves and a reserve study and deal with some of the general objections. If you're having a problem getting owners to go along with the need to fund reserves, this certainly will be helpful.
You know, when unit owners think of maintenance, they generally think of the day-to-day or seasonal maintenance that they can see being done by contractors or employees. Items like lawn cutting, building painting, or just cleaning the common recreational facilities lead an owner to believe that their regular assessment is taking care of the common areas. But even though the assessments are keeping the common areas looking good, these common areas are physical items, which will also deteriorate over time, and most will have to be replaced or undergo major renovation at some point during their life. It's for this replacement or major renovation that capital repairs and replacement reserves are necessary.
You see, the concept of reserves is very simple when explaining it to someone. We want to have the money available when the repair is needed. But when owners see what that might cost, you often get resistance in the form of, "I'm not going to be living here when that roof needs replacing," or "I'll be dead by then. Why should I pay for it now?" Or "Won't this make the assessment too high for me to sell my unit?" These are all legitimate arguments. If the owner was living in a single-family home instead of in a community association, it would be their choice whether to save for the repair or to borrow money for it when the repair is needed, or just to postpone making the repair as long as they can.
But in a community association, the association, not the individual, is responsible for the repair and replacement of the common areas. And the association is required by its governing documents to make those repairs. In many states, associations are required by law to maintain reserve funds for the repair and replacement of major items. One of the first things you need to do when dealing with reserves is to ask your association attorney about your state laws and your governing documents to make sure that you're doing what you're legally bound to do. But even if your state law and documents don't address the issues of reserves directly, you should still consider the whole issue very carefully. Why?
Because in order to be a well-run association, you need to be able to make the repairs when they're required, and associations should be on a pay-as-you-go basis. So let's talk about how you're going to do this. As a board member, you're elected to take care of the common areas. Part of that care is planning for the future, and that means having a real plan for those major expense items that will occur 10 years, 20 years, or even further out.
Many associations that have not planned for the day when these items would need to be repaired or replaced ended up assessing the owners additional amounts above and beyond the normal assessment to cover the cost of when the work needs to be done. These additional assessments are among the most unpopular actions that a board can take. It often places financial hardships on the owners, especially those unit owners living on fixed incomes. However, proper planning can prevent this. A capital repair and replacement reserve plan allows an association to determine future financial needs and spread the costs over a period of time. It also allows for the spreading of the cost of replacing common areas between current and future unit owners. As we said earlier, some owners have argued that they shouldn't have to contribute to the replacement of common areas since they're not going to be living in the association at the time of the repair or replacement. However, it's only fair that existing unit owners pay for the current wear and tear on the common areas, just as the new owners will have to pay for it during their residency.
There are other reasons for having a reserve fund. It allows the association to maintain the aesthetic quality of common areas by keeping them in a state of good repair, which directly impacts the property values as well as the satisfaction level of the unit owners. Many state laws specifically require the association to maintain a reserve fund. The secondary mortgage market looks at the association's reserve plan prior to lending. The American Institute of Certified Public Accountants now requires their auditors to disclose information in their reports regarding reserve funding. But basically, it's just good business to prepare for those things that you know are going to occur. No surprises should be the rule of all board operations. A well-run association should never have to face an additional assessment outside of a natural disaster that exceeds their insurance.
You need a reserve plan.
A reserve plan consists of 3 parts: the reserve study, how the reserves will be funded, and what to do with those funds. Let's look at the reserve study first.
A reserve study consists of 2 parts, a component study and a funding study. Because of the technical details involved, and because of the critical importance of the study, we would highly recommend that the association retain the services of a qualified individual or firm to conduct either or both sections of the study. Although no state law prohibits a board of directors from conducting their own reserve study, they could be exposing themselves to some potential liability if adequate funds are not set aside. If you're not an expert in this area, don't do it.
If you decide to get the formal reserve study done by an outside firm, you need to develop a good set of specifications in order to get an apples-to-apples quote. One of the problems reserve planners face when they're trying to give associations a price on a reserve study is that they're very often given poor or no guidelines as to what is to be included in this study. When that happens, associations end up with quotes ranging everywhere from a Volkswagen to a Cadillac in pricing. Use the information you gain here to put together a good set of specs.
When reviewing the bids, an association needs to take great care in ensuring that the reserve planner they select is fully qualified to complete the study. Have they received a designation from APRA or CAI? Both have established criteria to designate individuals who are qualified to prepare reserve studies for associations. If they are, then you can at least be comfortable that they subscribe to the standards and ethics established by those groups. If they're not designated, then you're going to have to spend a lot more time investigating their capabilities and references. At a minimum, you'll want to talk with other associations for whom they've completed studies and see a final work product, and maybe talk to the board members that worked with them to see if they were fully satisfied. Never contract for a reserve study until you're completely comfortable that the people doing the study are qualified to do one. There will be more information about how to find these people in the credits at the end of this section of the tape.
What if you don't have the funds to hire these experts right away?
Well, the fact that an association may not be able to afford a full reserve study from a qualified individual or firm should only be a short-term postponement. An association could make use of one of the numerous reserve study kits available in order to initially get their reserve program off the ground. But they should plan for the day when they get a formal reserve study done by qualified people. In fact, they should reserve for this.
If the association decides to have a reserve planner do the reserve study, they need to tell them what type of study they want done. A full reserve study is one in which 5 reserve study tasks are done. These are the component inventory, which is the listing of all of the physical components to be included in the study, an assessment of their current conditions, estimating the remaining useful life, and the repair or replacement cost of the item. the status of the current reserve fund, and a formal funding plan. The second type of reserve study is termed the update with a site visit and on-site review. This includes all the 5 areas covered in the full reserve study, with the exception that the component inventory portion is accepted as is and is not reviewed for accuracy. This is generally done after a full reserve study has been done to see if the reserve plan is on track. The third type is an update with no site visit and off-site review, in which only 3 of the tasks are done. This would be the estimating of the remaining useful life and repair and replacement cost for the reserve component, as well as reviewing the current status of the fund and the funding plan. If this is your first reserve study, we would strongly urge you to get the full reserve study done the first time. Now, let's get back to how the reserve study is done.
The first part of a reserve study determines which components of the association are to be included in the study. A component is a physical item that will deteriorate over time and needs to be repaired or replaced. Start with your association documents to determine which components should be included in the study. The easiest way to do this is to come up with a master list of all of the physical components in the association. Sit down with your attorney and review the list to make sure that 1, everything is included, and 2, to determine what the association is actually responsible for. Now, you might find some gray areas regarding responsibility, and this is a good time to clear those up. For example, windows and doors in a condominium association are sometimes considered part of the common areas and sometimes not. As a side benefit, if you share this list with the unit owners, they will then have a document detailing what they are responsible for and what the association is responsible for. This greatly reduces the arguments over who is supposed to do what.
In your documents, areas may be defined in general terms, such as roads, sidewalks, buildings, or may be broken down into a more detailed listing. In a homeowner association, this may include only recreational facilities and roads. In a condominium association, this may include the building structures, including siding, porches, windows, doors, sidewalks, fencing, etc. If you're in a high-rise condominium, this may include elevators, air handling systems, and other engineering equipment. When this part of the reserve study is done, the association often looks at the most basic and obvious items of the common areas, such as roads, roofs, siding, and the common recreational facilities, such as a clubhouse or pool. They may neglect to include those items that are not easily seen. For example, the association sometimes owns the water and sewer lines from the common buildings to the roads. When looking at mechanical equipment, don't forget the other subsidiary items that are part of the entire system. For example, a swimming pool filtration system includes pumps, possibly heaters, piping, automated chemical feeders, and other items. And with clubhouses, you've got the carpeting, furniture, or office equipment. These will all have to be replaced at some point in time.
Once the list is finished, the board should determine which items will be taken care of in the annual operating budget and which items should be specifically put into the reserve plan. For example, if you have a pool, the cleaning is an ongoing maintenance expense, while replacement of the filter and pump would be considered a capital replacement. Cleaning the roads is a maintenance expense, while top dressing or resurfacing them would be a reserve item.
Next, you need to collect information about the individual items. This is where you determine how much of what type of items do you have. For example, how many square feet of asphalt road? Then, the life and valuation estimate should be prepared. This is estimating the normal useful life of the component, its current condition, its remaining useful life, and the estimated repair or replacement cost for it. Using the road as an example again, how long should a road normally last? What condition is it now in? How old is it now? How much time does that leave before it will need to be repaired or replaced? And how much should that cost?
In determining the useful life expectancy and how much of that is remaining, you'll need to find some source of information to guide you if you're not using a professional reserve analyst. You may find some of this information from the manufacturer of the item or from trade associations that publish standards regarding the items, or you may even have it in your own files if your association has repaired or replaced that item in the past. Don't forget, however, that averages of life expectancy may be national averages, and you may have to adjust for regional differences. Outside areas tend to deteriorate faster in northern climates or near water, especially salt water, than they do in interior, warmer, and drier climates. You'll also want to look at how the repair or replacement will be done where items overlap. As an example, when replacing the roof of a clubhouse, you'll probably also replace the gutters and downspouts at the same time, even if their life expectancy is longer. So the cost of replacing those items should be scheduled at the same time as the roof. For your information, when we talk about assessing the condition of the components, this is generally based upon an on-site visual inspection of the items, termed non-invasive. This means that the people doing the examination do not take core samples of the roads or dig up the common areas to inspect pipes. If you're concerned about a specific area and wish to have more than just a visual inspection done, you need to make sure that you tell the reserve planner this information in advance or include it in your specifications when sent out for bid. If you're doing the reserve study yourselves, this is one area where you really need experts to help.
Next, you'll need to determine the length of the reserve study. This is the amount time the study covers. Generally, a reserve study should cover the time when most of the repairs or replacements will be accomplished. This may be 20 years, 30 years, or 40 years. At a minimum, the reserve plan should cover 20 years, unless your state law requires a greater period. The length of time for which you want the reserve study to cover should be included in the criteria you provide to your reserve planner. Now you're ready to begin the funding study portion of the reserve plan.
Check the state law again to see if it covers the area of reserve funding. Again, you'll need to sit down with the association's attorney and make sure that you're in compliance with the law. In some states, there's simply a general provision that adequate reserve funds be maintained. It's up to the board to make sure that what they're planning to put aside will be adequate. Adequate is generally defined as sufficient when the need arises. Although this is somewhat vague, you'll probably want to err on the side of caution. You'll want to make sure that your reserve study plans for sufficient funds to be available when the item is scheduled to be repaired or replaced. There are a variety of methods used by different reserve planners with different software programs to determine how much money is needed by the association for reserves and when it will be needed. Which method is used by your association or by your reserve planner is less critical than your understanding of just what information that particular method provides you with and what it means. We're not here to argue the pros and cons of each. Instead, we simply want to point out to you that you need to have a clear understanding of the method used. The financial study will examine the current state of your reserve funding and compare it to the projected expenses of the component study. It should recommend a plan for funding reserves in the future. The plan should show you in detail each of the components, when it's estimated that they will need to be repaired or replaced, the cost of that repair or replacement, and the annual contribution required to meet the cost at that particular time.
All funding plans should take into account inflation, interest earnings, and taxes that will impact the reserve fund at any given point in time. You'll need to have your accountant review with you the best way for these items to be handled with respect to your financial reporting methods and your association's tax situation. That basically covers the reserve study and its two parts, the component and the funding study. When you have your final report, it should include a summary that can be given to all the owners, explaining in English what it means to them.
Wow, Look at the size of those numbers. Now, how is an association ever going to come up with that amount of money? I mean, they'll have to double their assessment, and the owners will never go for that.
Remember, the board is responsible for preparing the reserve plan. How the reserves are funded is a second part and an entirely separate issue. Here again, you'll want to double check your documents and your state law to see if they require full funding of the reserves. If they do, then just get on with it. If they don't, then the board is faced with some choices. Associations can generally raise funds three ways: through the normal assessment, through special or additional assessments, and, if your documents permit it, through borrowing. You can choose to fund the reserves by using any or all of these methods, but make sure all of the owners know which method has been selected and what it means, and that buyers moving into your community can make an informed decision about purchasing in your association. As an example, you may choose to raise the annual assessment slightly and make up any shortfall with an additional assessment at the time it's needed. That's fine, as long as it's legal and everyone concerned is informed. That would include adding a statement to any resale or escrow package for potential buyers that would let them know that they could expect an additional assessment when and for how much for certain expected repairs. This allows them to make an informed decision about their purchase. The board should always keep everything open and above board. If you decide that you might want to borrow a part of the funds when the repairs are needed, you need to get all of the paperwork done way ahead of time. Borrowing usually requires a vote of the owners, so that needs to be done. Also, you should have all of the necessary approvals from the lending institution done prior to making this method of funding a formal part of your reserve plan. You don't want to count on being able to borrow only to be turned down at the critical time. In other words, don't panic when you see the numbers associated with reserves. Work on putting the best and most sensible funding plan together, always with the goal in mind.
Have the money available when it's needed, and make sure everyone is aware of the plan. Now we come to the third part of the plan, and that is what to do with all that money. The association needs to consider a reserve investment policy. This will guide the association in how the funds are to be invested and where the money is collected are to be placed. As with anything else, start with your association documents and your state law. Since the board of directors has a fiduciary duty to maintain, protect, and enhance the assets of the association, a conservative investment policy is usually the best course. Often the documents will require that association funds be placed only in government-backed instruments or institutions. Even if your documents do not specifically require this, it is by far the safest course in protecting the association's funds.
All policies and procedures regarding the handling of or investment of the association's reserve funds should be put into formal policies and adopted by the board. This provides continuity for future boards.
When investigating potential investments for the reserve fund, first look at safety, then liquidity, and then at earnings potential. Safety is the primary issue, and therefore the association should start with a very conservative policy. The association should limit who has access to the funds and how they may be moved or withdrawn. No one individual or firm should have the ability to transfer or withdraw funds from the reserve account. Reserve funds should always be maintained in an account separate from the general operating funds. At least 2 signatures, one of which should be a board member, should be required for any movement of the funds. It should require a board resolution to move or withdraw any of the monies. Be very, very careful on this. Reserve funds have been embezzled from associations by treasurers and by management firms. So place as many checks on this process as you can.
Safety should also be considered with respect to where the funds are placed. Government-backed securities, bonds, or accounts are the safest and are probably where the majority of reserve funds are currently placed. Since board members are not being paid to be investment counselors, they should not take the risk of investing association funds in instruments or institutions where the principal could be at risk. Speculating in the stock market is not a real good idea, even though the overall growth of the market over the past 20 years might possibly have given the association an excellent return. Short-term downturns or simply bad stock could cause problems. If you're uncomfortable with the whole investment process, start with the investment counselor at the bank where your association keeps its funds. Give them the policy guidelines for investment, such as only in government-backed instruments, and ask for their recommendations.
The second issue to be concerned with is liquidity. This simply means that you'll have the funds available in cash when they're needed. You should not buy 10-year Treasury bonds if you're going to need to withdraw money in 5 years. The best way to handle this is to develop a strategy where you have a combination of short-term and long-term investments, with some portion of them coming up for renewal or rollover every 3 or 6 months. This gives you the benefit of tying in long-term higher interest rates, and yet ensuring that some portion of this will be available without penalty on an ongoing basis.
The last area concerns the return on your investment. While everyone would like the highest possible return, that usually involves the greatest risk. Since high risk taking is not a goal of community associations, you probably will not benefit from the highest return on your investments over the years ahead. You do, however, want to make sure you get the maximum amount of return possible, given all the safety restrictions you'll be dealing with. Here again, you may want someone from outside the association keeping an eye on various interest rates and instruments and keeping you posted as to changes and possible investments.
Remember, too, that there may be a $100,000 limit on the backing of government-insured instruments or bank accounts. So don't exceed that limit by putting all of your money into a single institution. Wherever you place the association's funds, make sure that they're covered by the FDIC or SIPC.
There will be tax consequences to your investments, and you need to discuss this with your investment counselor or your CPA so as to prepare the best plan to avoid the payment of unnecessary taxes.
And that's how you put a reserve plan together.
One more thing. When you finally have your first formal reserve plan done, you need to be aware that that isn't the end of it. Different items deteriorate at different speeds, and they're impacted by a variety of outside forces, some of which are beyond your control. An extended period of severe weather could accelerate deterioration of exterior elements. If your association has an aggressive preventive maintenance program, you may find that the components are lasting longer than your initial projections and need to be adjusted. The economy may also impact interest and inflation rates, which will change your annual income totals available. So, you need to annually review the financial portion of this study with respect to economic conditions, and every few years you should have your reserve advisor conduct one of the updated studies to make sure you're still on track.
Well, we hope this has helped you with the subject of reserves, and that your association will be able to put together a reserve plan that makes sure that the common areas are maintained to your standards, and that no financial hardships are placed on the owners.
Remember, there's a short section right after the credits that's designed to help explain to unit owners why reserves are needed. Thank you.
And good luck.